Australia and continue to help the country to grow. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is this a split call? All right, thank you. Honourable David Cunliffe.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a quick call on the cognate commerce bills and in particular this telecommunications aspect. Mr. Speaker, the bill was originally introduced by Leanne Dalzell, was adopted by Simon Power and now Craig Foss. So it's got quite a history. None among us with any right mind would wish to disagree with the work of those three eminent parliamentarians, and of course Labor is supporting this bill through. This bill is part of a broader program of work to iron out some little crinkles in the business relationship with the West Island, and based on this progress we hope very much that we're going to address some bigger and brighter things like dividend imputation in the near future. We expect the bill is going to facilitate greater reciprocal assistance from overseas regulators. It's very, very important that our Commerce Commission, which plays a key role in the regulation of markets, is able to access experience from across the ditch. The reasons for that are several. One, that we are a small island market and that our experience across different industry sectors is... Oh, look, Mr. Chairman, I know the House is going to be delighted by this news. I've just been advised that I can now speak for the full 10 minutes. So I'm going to detruncate the remarks. And what I'd like to do...
Could you spend a little bit more time praising the former minister?
Now that I have longer to praise the former minister, the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, who was the chair of the Select Committee? No, in all seriousness, let's get back to the topic, which is the importance of having coordination between the regulators on both sides of the ditch. Why is that important? In a syllable, because the businesses are coordinated because they are cross-owned. Now, if you're dealing with telecommunications companies like Telstra and Telstra Clear, or, just as a random example, or Griffin's Foods, or Heinz Waddy, or anyone, or even Vodafone, which is a multinational, any of those companies, of course, has a footprint on both sides of the Tasman. They are global businesses in many cases, and in the eternal game between poacher and gamekeeper, it is very important that the gamekeepers have access to the same global resources and information as the poachers. And that is why it's important that our regulators are unified across the Tasman. So greater reciprocal assistance from the regulators across the ditch, allowing more government-to-government cooperation arrangements and regulator-to-regulator arrangements. Now, this might not sound very important to the people out there in TV land, but what it means is, in the telecommunications sector, for example, a better chance of getting cheaper, faster broadband. Pretty simple. If the companies concerned are held to a more competitive market standard, it means the price you'll pay for your phone bills at home will go down. The data caps you get on your internet will go up. And that's a good thing, because the regulators on both sides of the Tasman will be able to hold the market to account. And as the companies concerned are global companies operating on both sides of the ditch, it's very important that the regulators are able to work across both sides of the ditch. Mr. Speaker, the Select Committee has recommended a consultative procedure where the committee is concerned that a request for assistance might have significant international trade implications. The Commission can consult the Minister of Trade after consultation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and then rely on a statement by the Minister as to whether providing the information would significantly prejudice New Zealand's international trade interest. Now, it's not easy to think of an actual example where this would be an issue, but it is a safety valve. So let's imagine that the regulators on both sides of the ditch want to swap information about a particular business. The proposal exists as a result of the Select Committee's work for the Minister to say no. As long as it's within the international trade rules, the Minister can deem that that would be severely prejudicial to the interests of a New Zealand company and can thereby say, no, we don't think that's a good idea. That seems like a reasonably practical thing for us to insert into the bill, just to make sure that Kiwi companies don't get rolled over by their larger kangaroo competitors. So that's a reasonable safety valve to have in there, I think, and we ought to acknowledge the Select Committee for its work. I think it's probably relevant and fair at this point to note the change which has occurred under the current government in the Trans-Tasman trade liberalisation negotiations. Under the previous government, the standard to which New Zealand negotiators were held was to do what was in the interests of the New Zealand public and the New Zealand economy. In the last round of the single economic market negotiations, that was amended, and it is now for the negotiators to do what is in the joint interests of the two countries, and those sharp-eared and sharp-eyed amongst you will, of course, understand that that means that we could now be negotiating something which is not in New Zealand's interests as long as it was in the Trans-Tasman interest. And as we're the smaller partner, we cannot discount the possibility that that might occur. And I guess I'd call upon the government speakers next up to explain to the House why, as the custodians for the next 18 months or so of the national interest, they believe it's in New Zealand's interest for us to subsume our negotiation objectives to those of the whole Trans-Tasman market rather than to act in the interests of New Zealand Inc. Because one of the things that right across this side of the House, and just as a little aside, I think the public has seen in the last week with things like the manufacturing inquiry, an uplift in cooperation between New Zealand First and Labour and the Greens, all acting in a very professional way together to deliver services to the public. They're seeing us act as a united opposition to try to bring policies forward and ideas forward that will really help New Zealand go forward and to hold the government to account. So we are asking on this issue as a united opposition, why, national government, are you subsuming the New Zealand interest to the Trans-Tasman interest? And why then is there a risk that the New Zealand regulator might be leaned on by a minister because they get a phone call from Canberra? I could tell a few stories about meetings in the Beehive with the representatives of major Australian corporations, but perhaps it's not the occasion. Mr. Speaker, the Commerce Commission is currently constrained from providing investigative assistance and compulsorily acquired information it holds to Australian or overseas regulators. Now, that is an important issue. If evidence is found in a Trans-Tasman perhaps monopoly issue, which bears upon the behavioural performance of the Australian parent company, let's just say it was a bank for a start, the law currently prohibits the New Zealand Commerce Commission from sharing that information with the Australian regulator. That is not a smart thing to do. If the company is cross-owned, then the sheriff needs to be able to share information with the posse. That is a reasonable and prudent thing to do in order to get good governance on both sides of the Tasman. Mr. Speaker, in general, Labor thinks this bill is worth supporting. We acknowledge that it flows from work that has come from cooperation across the House, a bipartisan approach to international trade, or hitherto bipartisan, where we are managing for New Zealand's national interests, where we acknowledge the importance to New Zealand of our status as a trading nation and the importance of fair international trade rules. We understand that for that to work, you've got to have teeth amongst the regulatory systems on both sides of the ditch, and that in turn means the ability of the regulators to exchange information and ensure compliance on both sides of the Tasman. This is a small but positive step forward. It is not the end of the road, and looking forward, Mr. Speaker, to conclude my remarks, on behalf of the Labor opposition, may I remind the House the importance of whoever, for the time being, is sitting on the Treasury benches, Mr. Bridges, that you are operating in New Zealand's national interests, in particular and as well as that of the Trans-Tasman economy as a whole, because it is New Zealand mums and dads, New Zealand taxpayers who are paying our wages and in whose interests we are working. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Michael Woodhouse.
Well, Mr. Speaker, how lucky were we to have 10 minutes instead of 5 from the